This bridge wasn't just wooden bolts. It was memory. It was mornings with coffee in hand, watching fog roll over the lake. It was late nights with lanterns, kids chasing fireflies, and my grandfather's voice echoing off the water. It connected my cabin, my sanctuary, to the shoreline I had cared for longer than most people in this neighborhood had even lived here. So when I pulled up one weekend and saw it gone, not collapsed, not damaged, but deliberately demolished, I felt something inside me break. There was no warning, no permit on file, just a bulldozer trail, a heap of splinters, and a note tacked to a stake in the ground from the HOA. Unauthorized structure removed for community safety and visual standards. They thought they'd made a power move. That by wiping out my bridge, they were claiming the lake, shaping it into their resort blueprint, one overpriced spa dock at a time. But what they didn't know was that I still controlled the one thing they couldn't pave over, the dam. So I opened it, and I watched from my cabin porch as the lake receded and left their $5 million paradise cracked, tilted, and bone dry. That if an HOA can bulldoze your property without asking, what happens when they go after your land, your water, your life's work? That bridge wasn't just lumber, it was legacy. And the lake it crossed? That wasn't theirs to touch, no matter how many resort brochures they printed or community beautification emails they sent. At first, they chipped away with words, citations, vague complaints, calls for aesthetic alignment. Then they sent crews. No notice, no conversation, just destruction. And when I told them to stop, that the shoreline wasn't theirs, that the dam upstream fed the very water their resort depended on, they laughed. They said I was being emotional. They said the lake belonged to everyone, but they only meant the ones with money. So I stopped trying to reason. I stopped warning, and I pulled the plug, literally, because when people build their castles on stolen water, they'd better pray the man holding the valve doesn't let it all drain away. The first time I crossed that bridge, I was 7 years old, clutching a flashlight in my father's hand, the planks creaking under our boots as moonlight shimmered across the lake like shattered glass. That bridge was how we reached the cabin, the heart of our family's land. Nestled deep on the opposite bank, away from the road and noise and sprawl, it was where generations of my family came to breathe, to think, to be free. My grandfather built that bridge with his own hands in 1973. Just a simple wooden footpath stretching from the shoreline near the driveway across a narrow inlet to the rise where the cabin sat. Over the years, we reinforced it, replaced beams, restained the surface, and made sure it aged gracefully, like everything that matters should. The land had been in our name long before any HOA ever existed. In fact, the lake had once been surrounded by nothing but trees, birds, and the occasional canoe. Then came Hillstone Shores, the upscale development that promised luxury lakeside living. They bought up parcels along the northern bank and carved out curved streets and custom home plots that sold faster than they could pour foundations. I didn't object. Growth happens, and they left us alone. At least, they used to. It started slow. A new dock extension here. A paved trail that edged too close to the waterline. Then a bright white gazebo appeared on the northern shore, visible from our cabin deck. Still, I kept to myself. My land was mine. My bridge, my trees, my peace. But things changed once they broke ground on what they called the Hillstone Lakefront Club and Spa, a $5 million project that promised to revitalize the shared experience of the lake for all homeowners and their guests. I wasn't a member, never signed a contract, never agreed to let anyone dictate how I lived on property that had been in my family longer than most of those homes had been standing. Then, one Friday afternoon, everything changed. It was supposed to be a family weekend. My sister had flown in from Oregon, my nephew had just learned how to fish, and I had picked up fresh supplies to reseal the bridge handrails. I was excited. We hadn't all been to the cabin together in almost 2 years. We pulled up to the gravel clearing by the shore just before dusk, a quiet breeze rustling the pine needles, the lake glinting gold in the fading light. But something was wrong. The shoreline looked exposed. Where there should have been railings and timber stretching out across the water, there was nothing. At first, I thought I had parked in the wrong spot. But no, the old sycamore tree was still there. The lantern hook I had hammered into the stump last summer. This was the place. But the bridge was gone. Not collapsed, not damaged, gone. Just jagged beams sticking out of the earth like broken ribs. I dropped the cooler, walked down the slope in a daze. Sawdust still clung to the rocks. Tire tracks led up to the flattened area, and hammered into the soft dirt at the edge of the water was a laminated sign staked on a thin wooden post. Notice of removal. Per Hillstone Shores, HOA, Code 4.6. Unauthorized structures within the shared shoreline zone will be removed to maintain safety and visual harmony. I stood there for what felt like an hour. My nephew asked if someone had stolen it. My sister just stared eyes wide. I didn't say a word. That night, I didn't unpack. I didn't start a fire. I just opened a folder in my glove compartment, the one with our deed, boundary maps, and the old cabin plat. I sat at the hood of my truck with a flashlight, reading by moonlight. Then I pulled out my phone and began digging. The first thing I learned, the HOA had recently updated their shared shoreline use agreement. It claimed the waterline extended 50 feet inland from the edge of the lake, and any structure within that zone required board approval. But here's the thing. My property predates their entire development. The land deed clearly stated the water rights and access easement ran with the property uninterrupted and unchallenged. Their so-called shared shoreline zone, it didn't apply to me. Never had. The second thing I found, their spa development proposal included scenic boat access directly across from where my bridge had once stood. In other words, the bridge blocked their plan view. They didn't remove it for safety. They destroyed it for aesthetics, for their brochures, for their resort. And they thought I'd be too stunned, too outnumbered, or too polite to fight back. They forgot something. The lake wasn't just their backdrop, it was my front yard. And the dam that controlled its flow sat squarely on the southern edge of my property. Gated, locked, mine. And suddenly, I saw what they didn't. They hadn't just torn down a bridge. They'd handed me the lever. The official letter arrived 2 days later, folded into a white envelope marked with the Hillstone Shores logo, sealed with the sort of smug precision only HOAs can muster. It wasn't an apology, not even close. It was a fine. Violation. Unauthorized structure within community visual zone. Infraction. Non-compliant shoreline use. Section 4.6. Penalty. $3,200 fine payable within 30 days. Failure to comply may result in additional sanctions. They didn't just bulldoze my bridge. They billed me for the inconvenience of having it. Attached to the notice was a photo, my bridge, mid-demolition, with the caption obstruction removed for safety and visual cohesion. Beneath that, a scanned signature from the HOA chairperson, followed by the words, "We thank you for your understanding and commitment to the evolving shared lake experience." Evolving. That word stuck in my throat like barbed wire. I had spent my entire life protecting that lake, managing erosion with natural vegetation, restoring the fish population each spring, cleaning the shoreline after every heavy storm while the resort homes threw their trash in branded bins and waited for pickup. And now I was being labeled the problem. I drove straight to the county clerk's office and requested the full survey record of my land, including the oldest plats. I had copies, but I wanted the county seals, the official documentation no committee could dispute. And there it was in black and white. My property line ran from the southern hill crest down to the inlet's edge. The bridge had stood well within those bounds. And, most importantly, the dam that regulated the entire lake's water level, also mine. My grandfather had built the original dam with help from local conservationists. In fact, without that dam, the lake would have been a swampy flood basin. I found the easement records, legal maintenance rights that passed down with the land. They'd never been revoked, never reassigned. The HOA's entire development depended on water stability from a piece of infrastructure they didn't even realize they didn't own. I had the key. They had no idea. But what they did know was expansion. Over the next week, construction crews appeared on the northern bank. Orange-vested men unloading steel pylons, hauling out floating platforms, laying the foundations for a series of private docks for spa clients and resort homeowners. When I asked one of the foremen about permits, he just shrugged and said, HOA said it was cleared. Fast-track approval under community beautification. I filed a public records request with the county. 3 days later, the truth arrived in a plain envelope. No permits have been issued. Not for docks. Not for shoreline reconstruction. Not even for the demolition of my bridge. It was all smoke and mirrors, an HOA forging ahead with what it assumed no one would challenge. I confronted the board during their monthly meeting. Walked in wearing a clean button-down, documents in hand. The room was full, mostly luxury homeowners sipping iced lemon water and nodding along as Karen, yes, Karen, the HOA chair, gave her pitch. We're enhancing our lakefront appeal for long-term value. The removal of outdated structures was a necessary step toward elevating Hillstone's brand. I stood, clear my throat. My name is Mason Ward. Yon parcel 14C. My family's land predates this HOA by 62 years. That bridge you tore down? It was on private property, and you've constructed docks without permits, on a lake whose flow is regulated by a dam you do not control. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen didn't flinch. Mr. Ward, she said with rehearsed civility, we appreciate your concern, but the committee reviewed aerial maps and determined the structure in question extended into the shared shoreline zone. As for the dam, the HOA has the right to maintain the aesthetics and accessibility of all lakefront features deemed communal. I held up the deed, stamped and dated. This lake isn't communal. It's partially retained by a privately owned dam. That dam sits entirely on my land. And if I wanted to, I could shut that flow down tomorrow. Another murmur, this time louder. But Karen smiled like I was a child waving a plastic sword. Mason, she said, I understand this is sentimental, but you're standing in the way of progress. This lake isn't just for nostalgia anymore. It's a brand, a lifestyle, and your resistance puts you and your legacy on the wrong side of that future. Wrong side. It was the kind of phrase that gets into your bones and rattles loose the last bits of tolerance you have left. I didn't argue, didn't make a scene. I just left, but I noticed something on the way out. A woman from across the lake caught my eye. Her name was Teresa. I remembered her, one of the early homeowners who used to wave when our canoes passed. That night, she nodded at me, small but deliberate. The next day, she emailed me. Then another neighbor did. Then another. They'd seen the docks too. They'd seen the lake get busier, louder, more crowded. Jet skis where paddle boards used to drift. Branded float, lounges blocking fishing zones. They remembered the bridge, remembered when things were quiet, respectful, honest. But they were afraid of the HOA, of being fined, of being labeled problematic, of being called sentimental. But I wasn't afraid, because I had the paperwork. I had the proof. And more importantly, I had the water. I did not raise my voice. I did not post a rant. I did not call the local news or march into another HOA meeting demanding justice. They already thought I was being dramatic, emotional. I let them think that, because I had work to do. The first call I made was to Eleanor Briggs, a sharp-enough-to-cut-steel environmental attorney whose resume included suing 3 municipalities for wetland violations and winning all 3. I forwarded her everything: land deeds, water rights, boundary maps, photographs of the destroyed bridge, and evidence of the unpermitted dock construction. Her reply was immediate and blunt. If you own that dam, you control everything. Let's verify and then put it in writing. The second call went to Nolan Reyes, a private hydrologist and water systems engineer with over 2 decades of dam management under his belt. Nolan met me on site the next day, clipboard in hand, work boots crunching on the dried moss lining the dam's concrete lip. The dam itself was modest, stone-faced, well-maintained, built long before the Hillstone Shores community had ever existed. It held back the southern edge of the lake, regulating flow into a downstream tributary that fed grazing lands and irrigation for a few local farms. Nolan climbed over the rusted catwalk, inspected the manual release wheel, ran a test draw on sediment depth, and confirmed what I had suspected all along. This thing's functional. Quiet too, he said. If you wanted to regulate flow or release a portion of the lake, you could, easily and legally. He handed me a document, freshly signed and sealed. Assessment of Dam Ownership and Operational Control, Parcel 14C. Confirmed. Stamped. Unambiguous. The water was mine. So I started planning. Over the next 3 weeks, I worked in silence while the HOA shouted in pride. They published glossy newsletters about the upcoming Hillstone Lakefront Spa and Wellness Experience, complete with champagne lake yoga, private floating cabanas, and exclusive dockside brunch. They even posted drone footage of the sparkling lake cutting over my land like it was their private backyard. I didn't argue. Instead, I hired Nolan again, not for inspection this time, but for upgrade. Together, we installed modern floodgates in place of the rusted manual release. Steel-housed, remote-controlled, discreet. One valve, one outlet, one control box hidden in a locked electrical cabinet behind a camouflage shed. It would regulate flow and track volumetrics in real time. Nolan set up an alert system, text messages and water level logs sent directly to my phone. Then I waited, because Karen, yes, her again, announced the ribbon-cutting event with more ceremony than a small-town mayor. They even brought in a local news crew to film the historic grand opening of Hillstone's lakefront gym. The date was set, Saturday, 10 a.m. sharp. The evening before, I took one last quiet walk down the hill to the dam. I stood on the catwalk and looked out over the lake. The moon reflected perfectly, framed by trees and old memories, the same view my grandfather once loved. I whispered to the water, "Let's remind them who you belong to." Then I unlocked the control box and opened the valves. Not all the way, just enough to make a point. A gradual release, calculated, steady, silent, enough to drop the water level by 3 feet by mid-morning. Fast enough to be noticed, slow enough to stay legal. I went to bed with my phone buzzing, real-time data from the dam. Water pressure, flow rate, downstream adjustment logs. At 6:14 a.m., I received the first neighborhood group text alert, which I'd been added to anonymously. Is the lake lower? Our dock ladder isn't even touching the water. Anyone else seeing this? By 8 o'clock, more messages. Jet ski can't launch. Floating barge is grounded. Dock angle is off. Did the lake recede overnight? At 9:45 a.m., I drove into Hillstone Shores. They had the spa opening tinted and staged, banners, pastries, mimosas, and local influencers posing in front of a balloon arch that read Lake Life Perfected. But the backdrop wasn't cooperating. The shoreline looked sick. Mud patches, algae rings exposed, wooden walkways tilted like broken teeth. The floating cabanas, once sleek and Instagram-worthy, now sat lopsided, half-dry. One was stuck in the muck completely. The ribbon hadn't even been cut. I walked right up to the crowd. Some people recognized me. Some whispered. Karen, standing near the podium in a pastel power dress, locked eyes with me like she'd just seen a ghost. I didn't speak. I just held up my phone and showed her the live feed. Water flow, 2.3 cubic meters per second. Lake level, minus 3.1 feet from average. Status, controlled reduction in progress. Her voice broke first. What were you doing? I didn't blink. Adjusting my property. You're draining the lake? No, I said. I'm regulating it. Legally. Every drop. See this? I showed her the ownership document. Your resort sits on the back of a water body that only exists because of this dam. My dam, which you never asked permission to rely on. People around us turned. I kept my voice calm. You destroyed a private bridge. You built without permits. You fine me for violating a view. And you built a $5 million spa on top of an assumption that you owned what you didn't. Karen stepped forward, eyes wild. You'll ruin the whole lake. No, I said again. I'll just ruin your illusion of control. The lake's still here, still beautiful. But the moment you tried to erase me from it, you made the mistake of forgetting who opened the floodgates in the first place. Behind me, cameras clicked. A drone buzzed overhead. Spa workers were already trying to rope off the now tilted cabanas. The board tried to salvage the event, but no one wanted brunch with mud underfoot. No one wanted spa selfies next to cracked shoreline and awkward silence. By noon, the event had disbanded. By evening, Karen had gone quiet. By Monday, the HOA had called a special board session. I didn't attend. I was already back at the cabin, enjoying the breeze, watching the water settle into its new level. Lower, yes, but still alive. Still mine. By Tuesday morning, The illusion of calm was completely gone. Resort guests, the kind who came expecting curated nature experiences and filtered lakefront selfies, were filing complaints faster than the HOA could triage them. One woman reportedly twisted her ankle stepping off a dock that now hung 3 feet above a receding puddle. A kayak rental company shut down its pop-up booth, citing lack of usable water. A man from Lot 38 posted a furious rant on the community forum about how he'd paid extra for a premium view and now woke up to a cracked mudflat. Karen had gone radio silent, but the HOA, they were in full panic. They issued a community-wide emergency bulletin. Due to unforeseen environmental variants, the lake level has temporarily receded. The HOA board is working with water authorities to resolve the situation. We appreciate your patience and support. Unforeseen variants? Cute. The real cause wasn't a weather pattern or geological anomaly. It was a man who was tired of being erased. A man who still had the legal deed, the dam, and the receipts. And now it was time to share them. That Wednesday night, the HOA held an emergency board session. The agenda was vague. The location had moved to the larger community center auditorium to accommodate what they expected would be a large and angry crowd. They were right. I walked in just after 6 p.m., clean jeans, collared shirt, no anger in my eyes, just purpose. Tucked under my arm was a flat leather portfolio. In it, my original land grant from 1949, updated with a modern title search and topographical overlays. Also, photos of the dam, signed statement from my hydrologist, a notarized letter from the county water engineer, and stills from drone footage taken the morning after the floodgate was opened. Each one showing Hillstone's new spa retreat floundering like a ship in dry dock. The auditorium was packed. Dozens of homeowners, resort guests, local journalists, even a council member sitting near the back. Up front, Karen sat stiffly beside the remaining board members, her expression pinched and unreadable. A microphone stood at the center aisle for public statements. I didn't wait to be called. I stepped forward, cleared my throat once, and spoke loud enough for the back row to hear. My name is Mason Ward. My family has owned parcel 14C on the south bank of this lake since before any of you lived here. The dam that feeds the lake, the one you've all relied on for your boat launches, your dock depth, your waterfront property values, sits entirely on my land. And I hold the original and uncontested rights to its control. I opened the portfolio and held up the deed. On July 12th, without warning or legal grounds, this HOA authorized the destruction of a private bridge that stood fully within the bounds of my property. You claimed it was a visual obstruction. You cited non-existent codes. You issued me a fine. And then you built a spa, a row of docks, and a floating brunch bar, all dependent on a lake you don't own, with permits you never filed. Karen started to speak, but I raised one finger. I'm not finished. I clicked a remote in my hand. Behind me, a projector screen lit up with a photo of the dam. Slide 1. Lake control structure, parcel 14C. Owner, Mason Ward. Slide 2. Drone footage, spa docks tilted, waterline receded. Slide 3. HOA spa brochure, promising permanent lakefront access. Slide 4. Letter from Nolan Reyes, water systems engineer, confirming controlled release through a private system. The room was dead silent. Then I said it. As of this morning, I have closed the dam valves completely. No more regulated flow. No more shared retention. The lake will drop by an additional 18 inches over the next week. Naturally, legally, and fully within my rights. Gasps. A voice near the back shouted, "Wait, what?" I continued. I will reopen the valves when 2 things happen. First, the HOA provides written compensation for the bridge you demolished in the amount assessed by my contractor. Second, the board issues a public apology, not a newsletter footnote, but a real one, acknowledging its overreach and the fact that it falsely assumed ownership of a natural resource it had no claim to. Karen stood now, gripping the table. "You're holding the entire community hostage." "No," I interrupted. "I'm holding you accountable." I turn to the audience now. Ask yourselves, what else have they claimed without permission? How much of this lake, this land, this community was shaped by assumption, not agreement. A woman near the front stood up. He's right. They moved the trailhead last year and said it was theirs. Never asked the adjacent property owner. Another voice. They told us the trees by Lot 12 were HOA regulated. Turns out they weren't. A man raised his phone. Karen said my lawn lights were a code violation. Showed her the manual. Turns out they weren't even mentioned. The room began to hum, not in anger, but in realization. Not a spark, a reckoning. Karen looked like she was trying to hold onto the table just to stay standing. And then, like a crack through glass, it happened. A woman from the board, Linda, who had always sat quietly during meetings, always avoided eye contact, leaned forward into her mic. I moved to dissolve the current HOA board pending investigation and elect a transitional leadership committee. Gasped again. Karen snapped, "You can't do that." But the crowd had turned. Another board member, Greg, who rarely voted against her, spoke up, seconded, and then a third. All in favor? Hands rose. First 5, then 10, then 24, then nearly the whole room. Karen turned red. "You're all making a mistake." I finally stepped back to the mic one last time. "No, Karen. The mistake was thinking control came from a title instead of trust." I picked up my folder, clicked off the projector, and walked out to a standing ovation. The bridge went back up 1 month later. This time, I did not build it alone. A dozen neighbors, some I had barely spoken to before the lake war began, showed up one Saturday morning with gloves, tool belts, and packed coolers. No one asked for permission. No one needed to. They simply arrived and said, "Where do we start?" Teresa brought her brother, a retired carpenter. Lucas brought his teenage son. Even Greg, one of the former board members who had voted to dissolve the HOA, came with a power drill and an apology. By sunset, the new bridge stood wider, stronger, and more beautiful than ever. Where there had once been silent tension and unsaid resentment, now there were smiles, sweat, and sawdust in the air. We signed our names under the railing. Someone joked it should be called the People's Crossing. I left that name carved in a plank. When it was done, the county supervisor visited. The same one who had been sitting quietly in the back of the emergency meeting now stood on the bridge, shaking my hand and asking what it would take to preserve the lake for good. I told him not money, just respect. Together, we partnered with an environmental nonprofit that specialized in local watershed protection. With their help and several private donations from residents, we launched the Ward Lake Conservation Fund. Its mission was simple: protect the natural beauty of the lake, ensure ethical access, and prevent corporate interference. No more resorts. No more floating brunch bars. Just water, trees, fish, and a community that finally remembered what mattered. We set up a seasonal permit system for local families and school programs. Science classes could bring students out to study water samples. Birdwatchers could apply for early morning access to the wetlands. Even the high school robotics club started building water sensors for lake monitoring. And the cabin, once just a private family hideaway, became something more. We retrofitted it into an educational retreat. No screens, no Wi-Fi, just journals, binoculars, sleeping bags, and history etched into wood. We called it the Lake House Learning Lodge. And on the mantle, under the hand-carved canoe paddle, I framed a copy of the old bridge photograph, the one from 1973 with my grandfather smiling, mid-build, because this place had always been more than real estate. It was memory, legacy, purpose. As for the dam, it still stood as silent as ever, but now people respected it. Not out of fear, but understanding. We installed a small plaque near the trail that led to it. Just a few words. Power isn't about control. It's about knowing when not to use it. I kept the keys, not because I wanted to hold the lake hostage again. I never did, but because now people knew whose hand kept the balance. And they respected it. Karen sold her house 3 months after the vote. No announcement, no goodbye, just a moving truck, a listing that went quiet, and a for sale sign that disappeared one morning. No one threw a party. No one mourned her absence. The neighborhood just breathed easier. The new HOA, or what was left of it, became a volunteer advisory group. No fines, no overreach, Just actual neighbors helping each other when asked. And me? I still walk the bridge every morning. Still check the water level, note the wind, greet the geese. But now I do it with a quiet pride. Not because I fought back, but because I rebuilt something better. Not just for me, but for everyone who was told to sit down, shut up, and let someone else decide what mattered. Now they know. The water remembers. And so do we. They destroyed my bridge, thinking it was in their way. But they forgot who held the water. Sometimes, the power they think they have only flows until you close the gates. That bridge wasn't just wooden nails, it was a boundary, a memory, a line they didn't think twice about crossing because people like that never do. They see something standing in their path, and instead of understanding it, they erase it. But power, real power, does not shout. It waits. It watches. And when the time is right, it moves with quiet certainty. What they didn't realize was that the water they flaunted, the view they sold, the life they tried to shape without permission, none of it existed without the hands that had nurtured it for decades. Without the quiet ones who built, maintained, and respected what came before. In the end, they were never in charge. They just assumed no one would challenge the illusion. So I opened the gates, and I let that illusion drain away. Now, the lake flows on my terms. And the bridge? It stands taller than ever, not as a symbol of control, but of knowing exactly when to take it back.